Welcome to BeFM Drama, where we turn great literature into gripping radio. In today's episode, we bring you part 2 in a 5-part adaptation of The Adventure of the Abbey Grange, a classic Sherlock Holmes mystery by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. Holmes and Watson have been called to investigate the brutal murder of Lord Brackenstall by a gang of robbers in his stately country home, the Abbey Grange. Holmes and Watson have just listened to the testimony of Lady Brackenstall, who witnessed the murder, and are now continuing their investigation of the scene of the crime. Holmes shook his head no when Inspector Hopkins asked if he had any more questions for the lady.
No, I will not impose any further tax upon Lady Brackenstall's patience and time.
Holmes turned to face the elderly maid, who was still tending to her lady's injured eye.
Before I go into the dining room, I should like to hear your experience.
I saw the men before they ever came into the house. As I sat by my bedroom window, I saw 3 men in the moonlight down by the lodge gate at the end of the drive, but I thought nothing of it at the time. It was more than an hour later that I heard my mistress scream. I ran down and I found her, poor lamb, just as she says, and him on the floor, with his blood and brains all over the room. It was enough to drive a woman out of her wits, tied there, and her dress spotted with her husband's blood. You've questioned her long enough, you gentlemen, and now she's come into her own room with her old Teresa to get the rest that she badly needs.
With a motherly tenderness, the gaunt woman put her arm around her mistress and led her from the room. Hopkins watched the women leave and shook his head.
She has been with her all her life, nursed her as a baby, and came with her to England when they first left Australia 18 months ago. Teresa Wright is her name, and she's the kind of maid you don't often find nowadays. This way, Mr. Holmes, if you please.
The keen look of interest had left Holmes's expressive face, and I knew that with the lady's account, all the mystery and charm of the case had departed. An arrest remained to be made, of course, but what were these commonplace thugs that he should soil his hands and his genius with them? Yet the scene in the dining room of the Abbey Grange was sufficiently strange to arrest his attention and reignite his fading interest. It was a very large and high chamber, with a carved oak ceiling and a fine array of deer's heads and ancient weapons around the walls. At the far end from the door was a high window of which the lady had spoken. 3 smaller windows on the right-hand side filled the room with cold winter sunshine. On the left, there was a deep, large fireplace with a massive oak mantelpiece. Beside the fireplace was a heavy chair with arms and crossbars at the bottom. A crimson cord was woven through the woodwork of the chair. In releasing the lady, the cord had slipped off her body, but the knots with which it had been tied still remained. These details only struck our attention afterwards, as, for the moment, our thoughts were entirely taken up by the terrible object which lay upon the tiger-skin hearthrug in front of the fire. It was the body of a tall, strong man, about 40 years of age. He lay on his back, his face upturned, with his white teeth grinning through his short, black beard. His 2 clenched hands were raised above his head, and a heavy, black-thorn stick lay beside him. His dark, handsome features were twisted into a spasm of vindictive hatred, which had left his dead face with a fiendish expression. He had evidently been in bed when the alarm had broken out, for he wore an embroidered nightshirt, and his feet were bare. His head was horribly injured, and the whole room bore witness to the savage ferocity of the blow which had struck him down, his blood and brains splattering the heavy carpet. Beside him lay the heavy poker, bent into a curve by the force of the blow. Holmes examined both it and the indescribable damage it had wrought on the dead man.
He must be a powerful man, this elder burglar. Randall, you said his name was?
Yes, I have a record of the fellow, and he's a rough customer.
You should have no difficulty in catching him.
Not the slightest. There was some idea that he had fled to America. Now that we know that his gang is still here, I don't see how they can escape. We have the news at every seaport already, and a reward will be offered for information before evening. What beats me is why they would have done something so reckless, knowing that the lady could describe them and that the police could not fail to recognize the description.
Exactly. One would have expected that they would silence Lady Brackenstall as well.
They may not have realized that she had recovered from her faint.
That is likely enough. If she seemed senseless, they would not kill her. What about this poor fellow, Hopkins? I have heard some less than positive stories about him.
He was a good-hearted man when he was sober, but a perfect fiend when he was drunk, or rather half-drunk, for he seldom went the whole way. He was capable of anything at such times. From what I hear, in spite of all his wealth and his title, he very nearly came under police investigation himself, several times. There was a scandal about his drenching a dog with petroleum and setting it on fire, burned it to death. Her ladyship's dog, to make matters worse. That was only hushed up with difficulty. Then he threw a crystal decanter at that maid, Teresa Wright. There was trouble about that, too. On the whole, and between ourselves, it will be a brighter house without him. What are you looking at now?
Holmes was down on his knees, examining with great attention the knots upon the red cord with which the lady had been secured. Then he carefully scrutinized the broken and frayed end where it had snapped off when the burglar had dragged it down.
When this was pulled down, the bell in the kitchen must have rung loudly.
No one could hear it. The kitchen is right at the back of the house.
How did the burglar know no one would hear it? How could he dare to pull a bell rope in that reckless a fashion?
You asked the very question that I have asked myself again and again. There can be no doubt that this fellow must have known the house and its habits. He must have perfectly understood that the servants would all be in bed, and that no one could possibly hear a bell ringing in the kitchen. Therefore, he must have been in close contact with one of the servants. Surely that is evident. But there are 8 servants, and all of good character.
All things being equal, one would suspect the one at whose head the master threw a decanter, but Nurse Wright seemed devoted to her mistress, and I cannot imagine her betraying the lady in such a way. Well, the point is a minor one. Once you have Randall, you will have no difficulty securing his accomplice. The lady's story certainly seems to be corroborated by every detail we see before us.
He walked to the large window and threw it open.
There are no signs here, but the ground is frozen hard, and I did not expect them. I see the candles on the mantelpiece were lit last night.
Yes, it was by their light that the burglars illuminated their work.
And what did they take?
Well, they did not take much. Only half a dozen pieces of silverware from the cupboard. Lady Brackenstall thinks that they were also alarmed by the death of Sir Eustace, that they did not ransack the house as much as they planned.
No doubt that is true, and yet they drank some wine, I understand.
To steady their nerves.
Exactly. These 3 glasses upon the sideboard have been untouched, I suppose.
Yes, and the bottle is just as they left it.
Let us look at it. Hello, hello. What is this?
The 3 glasses were grouped together, all of them tinged with wine, and one of them containing some dregs of sediment, beeswing. The bottle stood beside them, 2/3 full, and beside it lay a long, deeply stained cork. A change had come over Holmes's manner. He had lost his bored expression, and again I saw an alert light of interest in his keen, deep-set eyes. He raised the cork and examined it minutely.
How did they pull the cork?
Hopkins pointed to a half-open drawer. In it lay some table linens and a large corkscrew.
Did Lady Brackenstall say that screw was used?
No. You remember that she was senseless at the moment when the bottle was opened.
Quite so. As a matter of fact, that screw was not used. This bottle was opened by a pocket screw, probably contained in a knife and not more than 1.5 inches long. If you will examine the top of the cork, you will observe that the screw was driven in 3 times before the cork was extracted. This long screw would have transfixed it and drawn it up with a single pull. When you catch this fellow, you'll find that he has one of these multiplex knives in his possession.
Excellent.
But these glasses do puzzle me, I confess. Lady Brackenstall actually saw the 3 men drinking, did she not?
Yes, she was clear about that.
Then there is the end of it. What more is to be said? And yet you must admit that the 3 glasses are very remarkable, Hopkins.
What about them?
What? You see nothing remarkable? Well, I'll let it pass. Perhaps when a man has special knowledge and powers like my own, it encourages him to seek a complex explanation when a simpler one is at hand. Of course, it must be mere chance about the glasses. Well, good morning, Hopkins. I don't see that I can be of any use to you, and you appear to have your case solved. Let me know when the Randall gang is arrested. I trust that I shall soon have to congratulate you upon a successful conclusion. Come, Watson. I fancy that we may employ ourselves more profitably at home.
With some confusion at this abrupt announcement, I followed my friend out of the room. Holmes and Watson prepare to make their way homeward from what appears to be a simple, open-and-shut case of murder by a ruthless gang of burglars. But the great detective seems troubled. What could be the significance of the 3 glasses? And is there more to this case than first appears? Join us tomorrow evening to find out here on BeFM Drama in the 3rd episode of The Adventure of the Abbey Grange.